All right, episode 41, Social Witnessing. We're back with a guest we are super honored to welcome, a former noted journalist in Brazil whose career took an abrupt turn after her father took his own life in 2005. Now, Paula Fontenelle is an esteemed psychotherapist and author whose book, Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, was a finalist for the Brazilian National Book Prize and has been a leading reference in the country. Paula, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. Quarantine.
Yeah, let's start there. What is your quarantine story? Kind of lead us through what the process was like for you a few months ago and what the last few months have been like.
It has been quite weird, to be honest, because I was finishing, I'm here in the U.S., in Oregon, and I came here to get a master's degree in mental health, with specializing in trauma. So my my master's ended at the end of April. So during the quarantine, I was finishing my thesis. I was working in 2 clinics. I was moving out of my apartment, and I had one of those graduations online.
Yeah.
So it's just weird. Everything's just so strange right now.
And so were you planning on going back to Brazil? Are you trapped now?
No, I'm staying here for 1 more year, because after you finish a master's, you can stay in the U.S. At least you could until a few weeks ago, because I believe the president just canceled that too.
Oh, wow.
But you can stay for 1 more year and work in the area that you specialized in, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'll be here for 1 more year.
Wow.
So what's quarantine life like for you? Are you getting out there now again?
I know. I have actually within the last 2 months, I think I've been maybe to the supermarket 4 times, but that's it. And I go out for walks because my neighborhood, not many people do that. So when we do see each other coming, we do one of those images that we associate with quarantine. Now one of us will cross the street and wear a mask. It's just, but I try to not leave. I don't feel safe. So, but I don't know if you're following Brazil. Brazil is in bad shape now. The first country in the world now is the U.S. and the second is Brazil.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I assume you have a lot of family back there?
Yes, all my family, apart from my 2 sisters who are here in Oregon, all my family is there, and my mom I feel so bad for her because she's been also inside her house and she lives by herself. So she's been alone for 2 months. And that's the one we worry about. But she's been very scared and responsible. That's keeping her inside. She won't see anyone and she doesn't go anywhere. I have a cousin who brings her food in and does everything for her, but she won't leave. At least she's safe.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, so many friends, I have heard from so many friends with COVID in Brazil. It's scary.
And are they recovering? Have you heard of, are people recovering now?
I know 2 people who died. They were not very good, they were not very close friends, but I've had at least six people I know that were in the hospital and they recovered. They're well now, but one of them spent 21 days in the ICU. Yeah.
Wow.
21 days. It's really bad out there. My hometown, it's kind of not leading because I think Rio is the leading city now, but it's really bad, my hometown. Every day someone calls me saying they're sick. It's just... It's unbelievable what's happening there. And our president, things happening, so it doesn't help.
Right. Yeah, there's been a lot of controversy with him trying to kind of reopen the country.
Yeah. He never wanted it to close in the first place. We had a minister of health who was doing a very good job, but he left. And then after that, he already had another one who left before he was there for a month. I think 3 weeks in, he left. He said, I can't do this, because all the president wants is for people to agree with him and to say, this is just a cold.
Right.
He's in total denial. It's unbelievable what's happening.
Well, it sounds a bit familiar to the situation you're in right now in the US with the president and kind of trying to downplay the seriousness of it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's when I talk to my friends, that's what we talk about, because we say, well, it's pretty bad here, but out there it's not that better either. So,
Right. And what is it like in Oregon specifically?
in Oregon, I believe that the governor, she is doing a great job and people are following the rules. It's very strict, and you go really Oregon, at least here where I am in Portland, they really have followed the rules, and you see everything's closed. You don't see people on the streets. I felt that this week you started seeing more cars on the streets and more people on the streets, and we are, I think, the 48th state in number of cases, so it has been working.
Right. Yeah, we're in Vancouver, which is also one of the lowest places in the world, I think, or at least the.
Well, in Canada, besides the besides the less populated places.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
is the population following the guidelines and everything in Canada? Most of the population.
Not really,
mixed.
especially in the east. They weren't, and there's a lot more cases there. Here it's a bit hit and miss.
It's kind of, even people we speak to, it's really 50-50. People are either 100% just staying in, following the rules, ordering their groceries, or barely going out. And then there's other people that just don't worry about it. They're just kind of calm about it and still go out. They keep their distance, though. Like, I think people are starting to socialize in groups. We notice that a lot more now. You see a lot more groups together, but our phase 2 just started, where our government has allowed people to meet in smaller groups now. So that's changed things a bit.
Well, and they're opening like restaurants and stuff and patios, so we'll see how that goes.
And our schools from K to grade 5, I think, are opening June 1st. So kids will go on alternate days to try to distance them, but it's not mandatory. Kids don't have to go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very curious to see where that's going to lead us, this partial opening.
Yeah. Korea was kind of leading the way, but there's been some unfortunate news out of there. I read today that they're kind of having to start to close down again, and they've delayed.
Really?
They've delayed going back to school for 2 weeks because they've started seeing small outbreaks, and so they've started closing some things again. So, yeah. It's a lot to take in, which is why your work is so important. What's it been like, someone who specializes in suicide and educating young people about that? What's it been like kind of going through this process, and are you connected to the community still?
Yes, I'm connected to the community in Brazil. I've been doing a few things to see if I at least help a few people. I've been doing a lot of lives with specialists in Brazil, and I have an online weekly support group for those who want to join. It's an open group, but I've been having a lot of people join every week, and we talk about, the struggles that everybody goes through and the challenges. And it's just a support group to help those, especially those who are at home by themselves and they feel isolated, they feel lonely. So I have a few initiatives, and here in the US, I've been doing a lot of interviews for my podcast and trying to have patients. I still see patients. So, yeah, I'm trying my best, because we are actually this week I interviewed the president of the American Association of Suicidology here for the podcast. And we were talking about this, of the impact that it's having on. We just had a survey in the U.S. and almost 50, but around 45% of the population says that it has negatively affected their mental health or the quarantine and the COVID. So that's almost 50%. And 20% of that says that it has badly impacted, severely impacted their mental health. So we're trying to follow that as closely as we can. We haven't had an increase of calls to the suicide hotline, but there is another hotline here in the U.S. called the disaster hotline, and they have had almost more than 900% increase in the number of calls.
Really?
So that's a huge, over a 900% increase. So we know that it has been affecting mental health, and it seems to be at least the headline now, because mental health is so stigmatized that we're not used to seeing newspapers and, just the media talk about it as much as it is now, because there's no way to deny it anymore. It's affecting a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely just even see that in like people we speak to. People are really, I think even people who want to be positive, like you just have to like tell yourself every day to be positive, but it's kind of like this underlying current of like darkness or despair that's always kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think exhaustion too.
Mm-hmm.
What I feel, I think we have been through, and I've been, because about the lives that I do with Brazil and a lot of research that I follow and surveys, what I see, and it's very similar, at least Brazil, I compare Brazil and the US all the time, is that we've been through waves of moods. There were sometimes people were excited that they were home and they would have time to do all these things, and now they don't know what to do with their time anymore. They went through isolation, and then they went into connecting a lot and having all these happy hours online, and then that got old too. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just waves. You go up and down, and it's really hard. And I feel that now what I hear the most from patients, from people that I talk in my groups, and from colleagues talking to them, is just pure exhaustion. People don't know what to do anymore. They're tired of, nothing works anymore. I mean, they've seen it all. They've seen all the TV series. They've seen Netflix all day. I mean, everybody has baked cakes and bread. And then now it's like, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And the truth is, routine is the one thing that really works. And especially against anxiety. So if you can make an effort and keep your routine, that is a big help, but it's hard sometimes. And be kind to yourself too. Sometimes you don't feel like doing anything, just don't, and be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel there's a lot of guilt too when you see so many people, especially the ones who are working, and you see people working and getting all these things done, and you look at social media, everyone is baking, everyone is okay, and then you look at yourself, well, but I can hardly get out of bed today, so what's wrong with me? And there's a lot of guilt trips.
Yeah.
So that's really hard. Makes it harder, I think.
Yeah, especially in places like in Vancouver, for example, it's really mixed. So like our beaches are full, the parks are full. So if you're not,
Really?
yeah, yes,
Wow.
and it's been like that for as long as we've seen it. Maybe the first few weeks were less busy, but we haven't had the big breakouts. I mean, in all of British Columbia, we've had like only 2,500 cases.
Mm-hmm.
So, we got lucky that way, but people are not, or a lot of people are not really respecting or didn't respect the rules as much. So that makes it tougher for people who are like exhausted, like you say, and then they see people at the beach and nobody's getting sick, and you're like, well, what's happening here?
Mm-hmm. And I feel also that there are more, and I see that even in my friends who are very strict with the quarantine, they kind of, now they're looking at, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. They're becoming, taking more risks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going out more. And I have friends who are going to parks, and but we social distance, but that's not, it's just not good enough. But I think people are taking more risks now because they're so exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for everyone, right? For us who are alone at home, and it goes for families who just can't, I saw there's a very famous Brazilian comedian, and this week she did something that it's been one of those that went viral in Brazil. And it's a video, it's a very short one, it's like a minute and a half, and she starts saying, "Oh, how are you, single people?" This is like the beginning of the quarantine. She goes, "Oh, I remember when we were here, married for a long time, taking care of kids, taking them to school, and you were all partying, Tinder here." And, it just makes fun of them. And she goes, "You know what? Things have changed. Guess what? Where are you now today? Alone, right? So here we are. We are spooning when we go to bed. We have someone, to talk to every day. So how about that?" So she makes fun of the single people. And then it flips, and then she's kind of drunk, holding this glass of wine. She goes, "Well, it has turned again. There's nothing else to talk about. I can't stand my husband. And we've had all the conversations. We have thought about everything. We have watched all the movies on Netflix. I just can't take it anymore. You know what? Things have changed again, and I envy you, single people." But that's a good example of what this quarantine is. Things are changing all the time. One day it's good that you're alone and you have all the freedom, but then you start feeling that you need connection because we are social beings. So
Yeah.
it's just a roller coaster, I think.
We're definitely going through the same. Like, on one level, I was so happy to work from home. I'm like, wow, we're going to get to spend all this time together. And then, like, last week, I was just like, can't I just be by myself for a minute?
No, you cannot.
Sorry. And you guys live in a small apartment, right? I listened to one of your podcasts. You mentioned that, so that's hard.
Yeah.
I really feel for parents, I have to say.
Yeah, it's
Nothing
definitely.
compares to parents, really. You are having the worst.
Yeah, well, and too, you work and write a lot about kids facing suicide. I read some in one of the articles you wrote that among 10 to 14-year-olds, the U.S. suicide rates nearly tripled in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, scary.
Scary.
But it's all over the world. It has been rising a lot, unfortunately.
And do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of your research has attributed that to?
Mm-hmm. There are many causes. You can't attribute to one thing specifically. Back in the 90s, we used to attribute and associate suicide a lot with mental health issues, and especially depression. But what we see now is there are many other reasons behind it. It used to be that we used to say, I remember back then, we used to say that 90% of suicides were related to mental health issues, but not anymore. What we see now, the latest numbers we have for the U.S., and I mentioned the U.S. a lot because the numbers are trustworthy. They take it seriously. Australia does too, Canada, the UK does, but many countries don't. So, but in the U.S., what we see now is that 54% of the cases of suicide, it's not just youth, but globally, are related to personal crisis. When it comes to youth, there are many reasons. Social crisis, they have a lot of pressure because of all the changes that they go through. We all remember, we've been there, right? Mm-hmm. Especially teenagers, all the hormonal changes, your physical changes, there's bullying, all of that have an impact. Family dynamics is the main one. So you can have, for example, some kind of abuse in the house, or alcoholism, substance abuse. It's usually related to family dynamics, but it can be related to the brain development, because they don't have the area of the brain where you moderate, where you make all the decisions, is the prefrontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. When you moderate your actions and you do more clear thinking and decision making that's not fully developed. But on the other hand, the emotion of the midbrain, where the emotional area of the brain is fully developed, so you have a lot of mood swings too.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many, many, many reasons behind it, and we are very concerned about this population because it has been rising everywhere. It's not just the U.S. really.
Yeah, and the other that's more of like the headline in recent years has been social media. And I read in one of your things that they did a study in 2017 with more than 500,000 kids between the ages of 13 and 18 and found that adolescents who spent more screen time had a significantly higher likelihood to experience depressive symptoms or have at least one suicide-related outcome. So it sounds like it's not just headline.
No, it's not just. No, most of the research shows that it has to do with the time that you spend online. For many reasons, and we don't want to demonize social media. There's a lot of great things about social media. They do learn how to socialize. That's the way they do it nowadays, and to express themselves and to get in touch with people and to connect. So it's not all bad, but it does have, like most things in life, it's about moderation. And it's different for us adults when we look at social media and we see all these happy people because that's what everybody does. Mm-hmm. I think now the quarantine has changed that a little bit. I have been seeing a little change in social media. People are talking about bad times now and what they're going through. But before, it's all about traveling, partying, and everybody looks great and everybody has everything they need. But for us adults, we look at it and we know that it's not necessarily true and it's just snapshot of someone's life. But for kids, that's reality, and they compare themselves. So, and what research shows is that it has to do with time too. If you spend more than 3 hours, and that's what this research that you just mentioned shows, more than 3 hours a day on social media, it really increases your chance of having a suicide-related outcome. It can be suicidal thought, ideation, it can be even attempt or even death.
Is that 3 hours social specific, or is it just screen time in general?
Screen time in general. But they spend most of the time, when we talk about the youth, they spend most of their time socializing.
Right.
It's not like us, we do research, right? We old people. Yeah. We read the news, we do research.
Yeah, I'm sure that's I know it's stressful for me, a stressful statistic, just because especially now with kids, with parents being stuck at home with kids are going to be on screens a lot more just because there's nothing else to do. And so, it's
that's one of the big challenges for parents today, I think. But you know what? The way I see it too is that you need to give example. Kids look at their parents, and if you're telling them you can't be online for 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day, what about you? Do you stay online 3 or 4 hours a day too? So it has a lot to do with that too. You can't tell them not to do it and then you're online all the time, because this is not just a youth issue today. I don't know about you, and I don't know if it's as bad in Canada, but most of my friends, it's hard to get them to not look at their phones when they're around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a lot different now that we're in quarantine. I find myself on my phone a lot, but pre-quarantine, when I was out, I think Yaniv can vouch for me. I never look at my phone when I'm with people. I'm just living my life, and he'll call other people and be like, "Can you get my wife to check her phone, please?"
I hear the same. My sisters get so upset with me because my phone is usually silent. Mm-hmm. And if I go somewhere, I usually I forget my phone. And if I'm home, I don't bring it to my room. I have all these rules about phone. I don't bring it to my room because I don't think it's healthy, because he will look at it if you do. Mm-hmm. So most of the day it's off. And I have it on, you can program it because people have all these excuses. No, but what if something happens? What if something happens? There's something you can do on your phone for that. So if my sisters call me, my phone will ring.
Yeah.
So I always tell them, if it's emergency, call because it will ring. So there are ways that you can go around that. I have many rules, and I do have rules with my friends too. If someone is looking at their phones and we're in a restaurant or we're just, spending time together, I will ask them not to.
Yeah.
But that's rare. It's rare, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's more rare now. And I find even for myself, especially late at night when I'm just kind of trying to numb myself or like zone out or just not really be present, I'm a scroller. I just scroll through information or Instagram or whatever it is.
But you know what? I think this is one time where we have to be a little bit more flexible. This is not a normal time, and we do need distraction. So one of the things that when I talk to parents is, this is not the perfect time for you to be strict. It's really not. I mean, give them what they need, and of course you have to moderate a little bit. But this is not the time to be very strict about that because it's what they have, and they have had a lot of loss for teenagers, especially. I remember all the most important things in their lives are their friends, and they don't have that anymore. So you have to be a little bit flexible. But apart from that, when that's over, you really have to take care of that because it has an impact. And what research shows is that it has an impact. Your brain is their brains are developing. And you are allowing these screens to wire their brains. And it's really hard to change that in the future. You can, but it takes a while. It's like any kind of form of addiction. Really, you have to rewire afterwards. So if you can work on that before it becomes a problem, that's the best way, really.
Yeah, it's been a struggle for us, or probably more so for me, because Michelle is in meetings all day. So we have a 6, almost 7-year-old son, and it's what you said about like this isn't the time to kind of be too strict. It's a weird balancing act where it's like, well, where is that line? Like how strict is too strict? How much do I give in? And but you can see the negative. Like I can when he's been on for too long, you can tell. You can tell it in their face.
Yeah, what happened? What do you notice?
I notice just his demeanor is a lot more kind of sullen, and then after he gets off, that's usually when we have our fights and arguments.
Angry.
Yeah.
Angry.
Yeah, because he needs the reinforcement. Yeah, and you're not allowing him to have that.
Yeah, and because we've been in a small place and we live in downtown Vancouver where it's harder to get out, where we don't have space. So we're moving next week to a place with more space, thankfully. But we've been a solid 3 months of just like in prison almost. It's just been a luxurious prison.
Yeah.
It's so tough, isn't it? I can't even imagine for a couple with a baby or with a child.
And just filling your days.
I think it's the hardest. Yeah, it is the hardest, I think, of all the situations. It's that and I think the elderly.
Right.
I often ask when I have my lives in Brazil, I often ask people, call your elderly. We all have them. They're so alone. I called my aunt the other day. She's actually just joined my support group. And she almost cried. She said, Paula, we're so alone. The only thing we had before was seeing our kids from time to time. And now we don't even have that.
Yeah.
And I feel like the anxiety too, because at least for us, you can be like, well, young people, the survival rate is very, very high in most places that we've seen so far. So you can kind of rest a little bit on that. Whereas with the elderly, it's really like, no, this is a life or death. You can't take any risks ever.
Yeah. So they're being bombarded with bad news. They're seeing that they really can't leave the house because they are in danger more than any other age group, and they're more alone than ever. So it's really been tough on this population. I'm going to do, I think in 10 days, I'm going to do a live with someone in Brazil who is specialized in this population, and we're just going to try to help families deal with that, because it's hard for families too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have moved them in and brought them into the family, and it's hard, especially if they have some kind of cognitive impairment, if they have dementia. And I was actually talking to a family in Brazil, and they said, Paula, it's so hard because they get angry. They don't understand why they can't leave. And you have to keep saying the same thing over and over. Can you imagine that?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't understand and they forget.
Yeah.
So they keep asking, why can't I leave? And they get angry. They get aggressive. They want to leave. And it's just a very, very difficult situation.
That's the one thing I've noticed about children, like anyone that I've spoken to that has kids, like under 3, maybe not, but other than that, they seem to kind of grasp the concept of why you can't go out or why you're not going to school. Like, it's been a big enough shock that they get it and it's not a question anymore and there's no fight.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you were elderly and couldn't remember, like that, yeah, like people would have to live through that over and over again. And then also, like even our son, FaceTime is something he can do. He can connect with his cousin. He can connect with his friends and FaceTime. But I think for elderly people who haven't adapted to technology, you're missing that other form.
Or don't have the resources for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does your kid talk about how he's feeling and his losses and what he misses? Does he ever mention that?
Actually, this podcast was but prior to doing this podcast, we thought everything was pretty A-okay. And then he was our first guest on the podcast, and that was the first time he expressed that it was hard for him and not being very happy about it. And now he's more expressive, and then even when he's not, we're very aware of his moods and how they change.
So we ask him,
Yeah.
I don't think he volunteers it much on his own. It's more through his reactions that we can tell.
Yeah, this is a hard conversations that I believe can be very helpful for families, because some families, they have a 6-year-old and they'll have a teenager and one, I don't know, different age groups. But I think it's very helpful to just sit down with all the members of the family and just ask individually, I mean, how has it hit you? How does it land on you? What are the challenges? What are you missing? And just respect, because we tend to compare suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So, but your suffering is not as big as mine. But no, just listen and sit down with them and see where it hurts, what their losses are. That's a very important conversation to be had, because we just, as you said, you just take for granted, you just assume. And if you don't ask, it's really hard to know.
Yeah.
Especially the youth, because they're not used to sitting down with parents, and sometimes they don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
No. So what? No, I'll talk to my friend.
Yeah, and the isolation for them that you mentioned, I actually read in another piece you wrote, isolation's essential drive to suicide. Most people who contemplate it believe that they should not share their pain. They feel ashamed, scared, and uncertain of how they will be perceived by others. Every time I am contacted by someone who is going through this and I respond, they react with surprise every single time. You know why? Because they did not expect it. Suicidal people are certain no one cares.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That must be an even bigger struggle these days.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I've been interviewing a few people who had either suicidal ideation for the podcast, or some of them attempted. And it's universal. All of them feel alone. Actually, there is a very good author. He's like my number one reference, Dr. Edwin Schneidman. He's American. I interviewed him for my book, and one of the things he said is half of suicide is the pain, and the other half is being alone with the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very powerful, and that's what I see. One of the people that I interviewed a few weeks ago, and He's on the videos on my YouTube channel. He's from the UK, and he was just telling me what on his mindset and on the day that he decided to take his life. And he said, Paula, all the way I was driving to the place where I was going to do it, and I was driving, and I sat there, and I kept looking at my phone and waiting for someone to call. That's all I wanted, is for someone to just say, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
And he felt so alone, and he said, I kept looking, and I kept delaying my decision. Now I'll give it 10 more minutes, maybe someone will. And he told me, all I could think about was, there's 7 billion people in the world, and no one knows the pain I'm going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine how lonely that is? But then the turning point for him was when he realized, you know what? No one knows because I never reached out.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed it all. That was the turning point. And he decided, I'm going to do that. And he drove home and he called someone, and he started opening up and coming out with it, with his pain, and talk about it. And it changed everything. He said, I realized that it wasn't anybody's fault. How can anyone know what you're going through if you don't reach out, and if you don't tell them, and if you don't share?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very common thing. People are so alone in their pain. And they're afraid of talking because they know people don't know how to react. And the moment you say the word suicide, silence. It's total silence. People don't know what to say. It's really scary.
Yeah, and what's your advice to people that you work with about that? Like, how do people begin reaching out, and if they're feeling alone and they feel like nobody knows their pain?
Well, the first thing to do is to, sometimes you believe, and sometimes it happens to them. I also interviewed actually a Canadian. That was my interview two weeks ago. He's a very well-known, won prizes in Canada. He's a business coach, very, well-known. And when you look at him, a perfect example of a perfect life. And I was talking to him about this, and he also attempted, and I asked him, because he actually said, I was very surprised that I had the support of my wife. It was an unexpected surprise. And I asked him, what do you mean? I mean, she's your wife.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean when you say unexpected? And he said, it's not her fault, Paula. I never trusted anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the first step, is to trust that someone will be able to sit in with your pain and to listen to you. And that's very hard. And if you don't think that there is anyone that you can think of, and believe me, there usually is. You're just in a state of pain that you can't see that, and you're afraid. There are hotlines that you can call, and people who are trained for that. So maybe that's the first step, because it gives you an opportunity to even rehearse and to get it out and to talk about it the first time with someone you don't know. So in a way, it's easier. For some people, it's easier because you don't know, and it's not someone who's close to you.
Mm-hmm.
And just make sure that and you will know, you start slowly. You don't have to immediately say, I'm thinking about suicide. You can start by saying something like, I'm going through tough times right now. I'm in pain, or I'm not doing well. There are many ways that you can kind of test and see their reaction, and then go from there. But reaching out, I find that it's really, really helpful, because that's what I have never interviewed a person who had suicidal ideation or attempted suicide. And when I ask the question, what helped you? It's always someone. It's never something. It's always someone who was there and who was present, who didn't judge, and did whatever they could to help.
Mm-hmm.
The other day I also interviewed a woman who attempted to, and she told me, I had this person that I knew for a very long time, and one day he just came to me and he said, I can tell that you're not doing well. How can I help you? And she said she was speechless because, again, I couldn't believe that he cared. Mm-hmm. And that changed it all for her. And that single person who wasn't even a best friend or anyone, but someone maybe who was, just noticed that there was something there. And he was very upfront with her. Are you thinking about suicide? Because that's one of the things that you need to do, and we are very afraid of. Mm-hmm. If you notice that someone is contemplating suicide, is to just ask directly. But she said that was the first time that she actually searched for help, was when someone expressed that. But she said, I couldn't believe it. Why are you trying to help me? She just couldn't fathom the reality that someone was trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the word you said, trust, really seems like an important one, because trust is learned both in both the good and the bad. And so if you've been raised in a situation where you don't feel trustful of other people's reactions to your emotions or to anything like that, then that's probably makes it extremely difficult to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I understand. It's hard to reach out when you have mental illness, because there is stigma associated with that, and much harder when it's suicide.
Yeah.
But it is helpful. That's the first thing that I often tell, either patients or people that contact me through my webpage and my podcast. Try to reach out. There will be someone, and if the first person you try, it doesn't work, if they're judgmental or whatever happens and you don't feel comfortable, go to the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important, because I think sometimes when you struggle with depression and even extreme forms of depression, sometimes when you do reach out to people, their advice is to look at the world around you. You're actually really lucky. And I don't think when you feel depressed, looking at someone who's less fortunate than you does not make you feel better. You don't feel better.
No. Every reaction that comes with judgment, or when you come from a place of superiority, that I know better than you, nothing helps.
Mm-hmm.
That's never helpful. It's never helpful to say things like, but you have everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's very common too. Well, just look around and you compare suffering. The person, one very important thing to keep in mind about suicide is that most of the times people are not trying to end their lives. They're trying to end their pain.
Mm-hmm.
So if we keep that in mind, it's not about dying. It's about ending unbearable pain and see no other way out. That's what suicide is mostly about. So when we understand that, and don't be judgmental, don't say this is right or wrong. Don't come from a place, this is for cowards, because we have this myth and this dichotomy that's so useless. Is it an act of courage, or is it for those who don't have courage, they're cowards? It's neither one. It's really unnecessary to do this kind of comparison, and it doesn't lead anywhere, and it's not helpful. So don't be judgmental is the first thing. If someone comes to you to talk about that, listen, and listen. They're trying to talk and they want to be listened. They're not there for you to give them suggestions and to tell them what to do or to point to all these great things in their lives. They know the kind of life they have better than you do, but they're in pain. And many times, if there is some kind of mental illness, then they have distorted views of life. They're not feeling, they're not in their best place cognitively and emotionally. So just come from a place of compassion and try to understand, exercise empathy, try to put yourself in their shoes and be present, sitting with their pain, hold their pain, and not judge. Judging is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, that's...
we're a little speechless.
I completely, I can't agree more. I think it's just, that's one of the most powerful things you can do for someone, is to just sit with them and sit with their pain and not judge them for how they're feeling, or how, like, everyone's on their own journey and their perspective is their own. Like, we can't see the world the way other people see it. So it's very, very important.
And it's a good reminder for anybody trying to help or knows of someone who needs help, that you don't have to do too much. You just be there and reach out and offer support.
And the other thing too is knowing about warning signs. That's very important, because most of the times people who do in their lives, they give warning signs. Now that I know, and after I got into suicide prevention, when I look back, I see that my father, for example, he gave all the signs, but we are not trained to identify them.
What are some of those? Sorry.
Well, some of the signs are very, very closely related to symptoms of depression. So they isolate themselves, they have mood swings, they start not taking care of their appearance anymore, they'll stop, for example, they'll stop showering. And many of them, when you look at the symptoms of depression, they're very similar. But there's some signs that are red flags, because they indicate that the person is not just thinking about suicide, but they have advanced planning. So one of them is, and that's one thing that my father did, is taking care of your financial situation and your affairs in order. So I remember a few months before he died, he called me one day and invited me to lunch, and we were talking. I said, "Oh, Paula, I need your documents, your driver's license, because I want to open a joint account." At the time, he was having a lot of financial difficulties, and I was helping them. So to me, it just made sense, because it would actually be easier for me to manage his money. So I said, okay. So I gave him my documents, and he opened a joint account. But actually, that was part of his plan, because he knew that if I had a joint account with him, when he died, I could manage the money easily. So this is one of the things that people do, and it means that they're really advanced. They have made a decision. They're very advanced. The other one is they start to give away possessions, even the ones that have some kind of sentimental value. So they start to give away things. The other thing, and my dad did that too, the other thing that they do is they start reaching out to people that they haven't seen in a while. They start calling friends and family members to say goodbye. So that's a very common thing. And my father did that the day before he died. He went to see my sister, and my sister noticed there was something wrong, because he was kind of lingering and staying for hours and hours. And she could tell that there was something wrong, that maybe he was thinking about suicide, because it was so clearly saying goodbye. He just wouldn't leave. And the other warning sign that is a red flag is when they stop talking about the future. So, for example, on that day, my sister would ask my father, Are you going to pick up Paul? I was abroad that week, and I was returning on Thursday. I still remember it so vivid in my mind. And my sister would ask him, "Are you going to pick up Paula at the airport?" Because he always, for some reason, loved doing that. Never understood why, but he did. He would always pick us up at the airport. And he would say, "Oh, I remember, a trip that I did with Paula, and it was so much fun," and he would go back to the future. So they start reminiscing a lot. And if you start making any plans about the future, they go back to the past. So all these signs, if they show these signs, you have to really, really be careful, because it means that they have made a decision and they're very advanced in planning.
That's really, I'm just thinking, because now you start thinking about the people that are struggling, and you're like going through the list in your mind.
Uh-huh. And you will see that once you know the signs, you will start seeing them around. Because I do believe that people, those who believe that suicide has not touched me, it's not around me, they just don't know they don't know where to look. Because it's everywhere. One person dies in the world every 40 seconds by suicide.
Wow.
It's the second leading cause in youth. Second. Here in Oregon, just to give you an example, since 2018, the Oregon Health, what is it called? Oregon Health Authority, they just released a new report showing that the youth in Oregon, that's the first leading cause. They're dying by suicide mainly. So it's just a matter of you being aware and looking around, because you will find it. You will find someone. They are around us. We just don't know because they don't talk. And we are not trained to see these signs. It actually happened to me. I had a friend of mine call me once, and I could tell immediately that she was calling to say goodbye. And I did what you're supposed to do. And I asked her very directly, "Are you thinking about suicide?" And she burst into tears. She had everything planned for that week.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so in asking, did it help?
Yes, it does. And it's actually a myth that if you talk about suicide, you plant the idea into their heads. It's the opposite. You release from them the guilt and the shame, and they feel that they can talk because someone opened that door. So do not be afraid to ask about suicide directly. If you don't feel comfortable saying the word, because I know even the word is hard for some people to say, ask if they're thinking about ending their lives or hurting themselves. But the best thing is to really be upfront and use the word, because it helps break the stigma, break the silence, and it shows them that you are okay with listening. You open that door.
Yeah, and that you're aware of their feelings, which feels like that would just in itself would be so huge for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes, I receive so many emails from people, especially from Brazil, saying that they're thinking about suicide. And as you mentioned, I'm always surprised that they're surprised that I replied. And I always think, wow, they're reaching out to a stranger. How lonely is that? Because they don't know me. They just know that this is something I work with and I'm very passionate about. But at the end of the day, I'm just a stranger.
Yeah, and I mean, we could go on for hours, but I think more valuable than that is to, if you could share with people where they could reach out to you or learn more about the work that you're doing or read your stuff.
Yes, I have a website. It's understandsuicide.com. And I have a podcast, and my podcast, you can actually contact me through there, but you can contact me on my website. There is a contact page. My podcast is also Understand Suicide. And I feel, it has been a surprise to me. I wasn't into podcasts before. I've been listening to podcasts for the last, 2.5 years. And I decided to start a podcast. And in 3-4 months, it just took off. And it has listeners for over 50. Last time I checked, 58 countries.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And I started a few months ago.
Right.
Yeah.
It just shows that there's so many people out there who need to listen to others and to reach out and to hear that they're not alone in their pain. So you can listen to my podcast, Understand Suicide. Also my YouTube channel, same thing, Understand Suicide. And my book, you can find it on my website.
That's great. Thank you so much for being on. This has been heavy, but such a good, so even like in our lives, we just feel there's a lot of people struggling. So I think even this will be helpful, because I think just having a place to go to be heard or hear other people would be helpful.
And I'm so glad that you contacted me because we do need to talk about suicide. It's out there, it's happening, it's unfortunately growing everywhere, and especially now because of this pandemic. So much going on and a lot of mental health issues. So we're just hoping the numbers won't go up, but it's not looking very good. So I think that the more people reach out and the more people have this open conversation, it's a hard topic, as you said, but it's so necessary to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been very informative and just, yeah, you're doing amazing work. Thank you.
And we'd love to have you back sometime.
Yes. Let's talk about other things too.
Yeah.
Let's laugh more.
Yes, laughing, that's very important. I actually wrote for Medium an article about this and how to help suicidal people, and I end with that. Please, humor.
Yeah.
Humor is so important. We need to laugh.
Yeah, to inject a little joy all around yourself.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and continued success with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.